Hello, everyone. The cause of death in the Gabby Petito case is finally in, and now I will give a profile of the case. Many have wondered why I would not do so before. All I did before was give a PSA, public service announcement to say, hey, we've got to stand down this obsession with the case, the round the clock media attention, the lynch mobs that are heading out to the Laundrie house and are interfering with the police investigation, because there were so many people so angry, especially since they saw the video, and they determined from that short video that Brian Laundrie was abusing Gabby Petito, and if only the police had arrested him, she wouldn't be dead. And during that PSA, I did say that I thought the police acted appropriately. They did not have cause to arrest. You can't just arrest people when there's nobody wants to charge. Even if they separated them for the night, which was a great thing that they did. But even if they had arrested Brian Laundrie, it wouldn't be surprising that Gabby would have bailed them out and they would have been right back together again, as often happens in domestic abuse situations. But I refused to go comment heavily on that video because it was very minimal, and I wasn't going to speculate when I had very little information. I wasn't going to add to the very angry crowd and push people into getting overly involved. So I just did a public service announcement. And the reason I didn't talk about whether I thought he did something to Gabby, whether I thought he murdered Gabby, was because there was very little information. Now, I'm not saying behind the scenes I might not have thought much of what the same thing you thought. He probably did something to her, no doubt. However, I'm a professional profiler, and I can't just come out here and speculate without solid information. Now, if I were working with the police behind the scenes, again, I might have gone, you really got to look at this guy, because what I'm seeing here is a very volatile situation. And the fact that she vanished and then he did all these bizarre things and didn't seem to look for her or report her missing, clearly he should be looked at as a person of interest in her when it was a missing persons case, and clearly after it was labeled a homicide. And even when it's labeled a homicide, if I'm not working with the police, if I'm just here on YouTube, I don't know what that means. And they didn't have a cause of death, and somebody labeled a homicide. Now, homicide is a manner of death. It's not a cause of death. It doesn't tell us exactly what happened to her. It tells us that somebody thinks somebody killed her. That's what homicide means. Now, sometimes they mislabel homicides. They do mislabel homicides. They label them a homicide when they're not a homicide. Or they mislabel a suicide when it actually is a homicide. Sometimes an accidental death gets labeled something it isn't, and vice versa. So somebody labeling something isn't proof that that's what it is. But somebody did label it a homicide. But since we had no cause of death, I'm like, I don't know what that means. It means it's probably a suspicious death, but I don't know what that means, and I can't comment on it. Now, it has come out today in the autopsy, the full autopsy. They have now given a cause of death, and the cause of death is strangulation. Now, that's pretty good information. And not only strangulation, but her hyoid bone was broken, which is something that happens when you do manual strangulation. That's a big sign of manual strangulation. Not of suicidal hanging, but of manual strangulation. Somebody else is crushing your windpipe, essentially. They're right there crushing the bones in your neck. So this now looks exactly like a homicide. Prior to that, one could speculate on all kinds of things that could look like a homicide but not be a homicide. For example, let's say she jumped out of the vehicle and injured herself and fell in a bad way, and something happened to her. It looked like she was beaten up, and somebody had attacked her, but she really died from falling out of the vehicle, and somebody hadn't really looked at that clearly yet. Maybe she fell out and Brian jumped up and put her back in the vehicle and took her someplace and left her there. It wouldn't be a homicide. It would be more of an accidental death. Let's say they had an argument and she ran away from him and she tripped on a rock and fell on another rock and smashed her head open and died. Again, that would have been an accidental death, but he might have gone, oh my God, they're going to think I killed her. And he took her and hit her someplace. So those were possibilities. And because those were possibilities, I didn't want to say this man murdered this girl. So now that it is labeled a strangulation and the hyoid bone was broken, that's clearly a homicide. Now, by the way, I want you to understand what a homicide is, because people misunderstand what that is as well. A homicide is death at the hands of another. That doesn't even mean murder. There's a thing called justifiable homicide. And that would mean, hey, somebody came at me with a knife and I shot them. Justifiable homicide. I killed them. They didn't kill themselves. I killed them, but it was justifiable. That's okay. Justifiable homicide is not murder. Then there is a thing called murder one, first degree murder. That's where you plan to murder somebody. Like if he was driving around with her and he said, "I'm sick of this girl," and then he decides to strangle her and he strangles her. That's first degree murder. Now there's second degree murder where they're arguing, they get in a big huge fight, and he reaches for her throat and strangles her. That's second degree. It means he definitely murdered her, but he didn't plan the murder. I think there's also, I'm going to hope, yeah, those are the main ones. I think there's a third degree, which is something during a homicide during a felony. I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer, so I keep forgetting these things. And then there's manslaughter, and manslaughter is where it's what happened was a homicide, but you didn't plan to murder anybody, and you didn't actually murder them. What you did was you killed them doing careless stuff like drunk driving. Drunk driving is a good manslaughter example. In other words, bad behavior that led to somebody's death, where you should have known your bad behavior was going to maybe lead to somebody's death. So that's manslaughter. So homicide is not murder, and murder is always homicide. So now we know that she's been strangled. That's not manslaughter. That's for sure. So we're talking about first degree or second degree homicide. Either somebody like Brian planned to kill her and did, or didn't plan to kill her but murdered her in a rage. So those would be the two things. Now, one could step back for a second and say, okay, how do we know Brian was the one that murdered Gabby? Well, let's take a look at things in a reasonable way, because everybody says, well, it's obvious. Well, that's where you have to be careful about obvious. They had the domestic dispute of some sort. That's certainly a red flag. And then she went missing. That's another red flag. And then he didn't report it, which is a big red flag. And then he ran around, and then he disappeared. Huge red flags. Okay, so the likelihood of her being murdered by somebody else with his behaviors is kind of small. In other words, let's say they had a fight and she ran off and she hitched a ride and got in a car and somebody drove away with her, and then it was a serial killer and he murdered her by strangulation, which would not be unlike a serial killer. But then why would he behave the way he behaved? He would most likely at that point, if she just ran off and disappeared and he didn't know what was happening to her, he most likely would have called the police and said, look, I don't know what happened. She jumped out of my car and I don't know where she is. He would have looked for her. He would have called the police. And then the chances of her body showing up where he's hanging around, that's kind of, points to him, as opposed to she's buried in somebody's backyard or she's found in a completely different direction than he's ever been in. Then you could say, well, maybe she just, maybe that's true. She just got a ride with somebody and they killed her. But his behavior is kind of hard to believe that's true, because if she just disappeared and he had nothing to do with it, the likelihood is he would have contacted somebody to try to find her, and he wouldn't have had all the other bizarre behaviors. He therefore had guilty knowledge of what happened. And his guilty knowledge could have been, all his behaviors, that she pushed me and I pushed her and she fell and hit her head. She jumped out of the vehicle. Guilty knowledge could be she died and I didn't kill her, but she died and I didn't know what to do, so I hit her body. That could be guilty knowledge. But now that we have the cause of death, which is strangulation, his guilty knowledge is not that something happened to her that he didn't have anything to do with. Now his guilty knowledge is most likely I murdered her. I strangled her. And that's why she's dead. And that's why I'm running around doing strange thing and I'm going missing. So at this point, enough evidence is in where I would say now Brian Laundrie would be a suspect in the murder of Gabby Petito, because now it is a murder. And before a person of interest, people say, well, I don't understand why they wouldn't, why he wasn't a suspect. And the reason was because the full manner of death hadn't been determined, because the full everything hadn't been determined. That what exactly happened to her hadn't been made public. Therefore, they were not calling him a suspect. They could call him a person of interest because she went missing and he's a person of interest in why she went missing. And then when she was found dead, you could say he's a person of interest in that she ended up dead. But to call him a suspect in a homicide and a suspect in a murder, you got to have more than that. You got to have a real link. And I'd say today we got it, which is why I'm willing to state, from the looks of this case, from the outside, it certainly looks like Brian Laundrie is the one and only suspect in the now murder of Gabby Petito. And hopefully now they'll move forward. Hopefully they'll find him wherever he went off to, whether he's killed himself or whether he's left the country or whether he's in hiding. I do not know. I'm not going to speculate on that. There's enough police investigation. And the police investigators are working on that. This is not something that I'm going to, and neither is Dog the Bounty Hunter probably going to find him either. That's probably a publicity stunt at this point. Not that bounty hunters can't find people, but I'm just beginning to wonder whether he has any information he can even work with. And there are enough people working on this case. This is not a situation where somebody's jumped bond, which is why you have bounty hunters. Somebody jumps bond and the police are not looking for them. They're like, that's what you get a bounty hunter for. In this case, there's huge investigative forces looking for Brian Laundrie. So I don't think anybody else needs to interfere other than the public keeping their eye out. If they see him, then they can give a call. That's what they should be doing. If he's still alive and he's wandering around a campsite, somebody might see him. If he's crossed into another country, somebody might have seen him and might see him in the future. The police definitely want the help of the public in that. But I think the pitchfork crowds and the lynch mobs and the harassment going on and the interference with police investigation, people need to stop that. The police have it, they know what they're working with now, and they're doing their job as far as I can see. I'm not going to say there aren't mistakes that have been made, but I wasn't behind the scenes, so I don't know what those supposed mistakes were. I'm not going to speculate on that either. But I will say, because people have asked, when are you going to say what happened in this case? When are you going to go forward and say exactly what went wrong here? And now I can say, Brian Laundrie should be a suspect in the murder of Gabby Petito. As far as the domestic issues go, again, there was a very short video. I think that we want to be careful about over speculating. I know there's a lot of people who've been in serious domestic abuse situations, and they say, I recognize that. Well, I've seen situations that look just like that, and the guy is not domestically abusing the female. The female is actually got a narcissistic personality disorder, and she's claiming things that aren't true because she wants attention and she wants to get him in trouble. I've seen that too. So on the outside, and for a very short piece of information, I think we want to not over speculate on things. And too much today is being done. We videotape all these things and say, oh, let's see what that person did. They had a whole thing about him being angry in a restaurant and saying that, oh, he was so nasty to the waitress or whatever. And I'm thinking, I probably said a few things to a few waiters in my lifetime. I hope that wasn't videotaped and I was, called an abusive person because of that one moment where they don't know the background of anything that was going on. No, we did not know the background of what was happening with that one video. We did not know. And I think we did not need to over speculate. I do think we need to have a lot of attention placed in domestic abuse. Absolutely. No question, because we need more people to be careful about, who they're hooking up with, and they should know the signs of domestic abuse, and they should know when they should get the heck out of there before the domestic abuse gets worse. They should learn the early signs of it and and get out of there. And people should help rescue them and get them out of there. And we need to do more teaching of that. I don't object to that at all. I want that to happen. I think there needs to be more public and understanding of domestic abuse. However, I think sometimes when we do it on the YouTube and we do it with videos, I think we just jump in the gun on things. And even if we're right, and many of the public may have been totally right that there's a huge domestic abuse situation going on here. Absolutely may have been right. But the problem is sometimes, even if we're right, we gotta be careful what we say under certain situations. And so that's why I would not say anything when I didn't have all the information or enough information as a professional to be outspoken, shall I say. But today, there you go. There's my final statement on that. Yes, Brian Laundrie now should be a suspect in the murder of Gabby Petito. And that's it for today. I just want to get this little video out to you all, and we'll see what happens. And I hope they find out where he is, and he then will, if they bring him in, then it becomes a court issue, and we'll hear more in court what all the evidence was, and he'll have his day in court. So thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you next time.